The mind can develop over time from a state of immaturity to maturity. And as it develops, as it matures, it gains a wider perspective. The perspective first allows it to understand its own shortcomings, to understand where I'm seeing things potentially poorly that are negatively impacting my life. And as the mind continues to develop, it can even zoom back even more to a fourth-person perspective, where it can see how their mind operates, how other minds operate, and the link between these different minds. That's what you can call a 4D perspective, in terms of ego development at least. And in this video, I'm going to talk about exactly that. Moving from a 1 to 2D perspective to 3D to 4D. And if you are watching this video, you probably have a 3D or 4D perspective. Now let me talk about what this means. So a 1D perspective, 1 to 2D really means, so 1D is simply a single point, right? And a 2D, in two-dimensional at least, means you can draw a line between 2 points. And that 2 points, you can put on your piece of paper. And 3D would be if you introduced a new axis. In terms of ego development, in terms of the mind, 2D really means you are subject to your impulses. You are subject to whatever's happening is happening. Because you can't zoom out of that 2D perspective, you can't even see where you are, right? If you are the paper, you can't see what the paper is. You can't see what the drawing is because you are the paper, right? And that is kind of limiting. Now, at some stage in our growth, we start to develop a more 3D perspective. It might be a more mature 3D perspective or more immature 3D perspective, but the 3D perspective really is, now I can perceive who I am on the page. Now I am able to understand what that drawing is from a perspective that's now pushed out. You have a new axis, you have a new perspective to see and understand and perceive where the 2D is. And that's really powerful. That's actually where most self-improvement and a lot of Western society these days fits in, which is now I can improve myself, now I can learn things, now I can grow, and that's really beautiful. That's a really beautiful perspective to have, because it means that we went from these animals that were just subject to the whims of our environment and our impulses to, hey, I can delay my gratification. I can choose to pursue something of potential difficulty for some meaning. And it might be painful, but I can recognize that this is going to help me in the future. This can be beneficial to me in some way. And it really comes with this perspective and this capacity to see yourself and to reflect. Now, what is this 4D perspective that many people speak of? The 4D is, imagine zooming out of even that. Now, this is hard to do visually because we can kind of only really see in 3D. But imagine the 3D is now, there's a rip in the paper and you're beyond the 3D, and now you are able to perceive multiple 3D perspectives. In terms of the mind, in terms of the ego, this really means you can understand other people's perspectives. You can understand where they're coming from. You can understand the limits. You can understand the limits of your own mind. You can understand the limits of other people's minds and their limitations and the limitations in the way they think. And it's not so heavily subject to me. Now, how does this make sense? Because you might be thinking, well, in the 3D perspective, I can still I can still reflect and I can still understand how other people think and feel? Yes, that is true. But the difference is when you are in the 3D perspective, or a greater 3D perspective, because this isn't set in stone, you can be sort of between perspectives, it's constantly evolving, this isn't something that's super fixed, it's just a concept, it's just an idea. But let's say you are in that 3D perspective, what's the issue? Well, you're still coming from me. You're still coming from me and mine and my worldview. So you're able to perceive your worldview, and through your own worldview, you are now interpreting and understanding other people's worldviews. So you are seeing, oh, this person thinks that, but now it's completely filtered through how I see things. And if you have a worldview, or if you have a set of belief systems that conflict with other people's belief systems, well, your ego probably won't like it. It's probably not developed enough to see the wider perspective. It's probably maybe even going to be a little bit hurt. It might think, it might feel victimized. It might feel like those people are wrong and I'm right. It might think, I can really see this and they can't. And I can understand them, but I can only understand that they're wrong. So with it comes immaturity. With it comes a sense of immaturity. Now, it might not be what you consider to be immature, because this is how most of the world operates. Most of the world is operating through that 3D perspective right now. But when you can move into a 4D perspective, that really means you've zoomed out. It really means you've zoomed out and you are now able to truly understand other people's perspectives without the feeling of, hurt, or as much of hurt that comes from the self. And I think that's where the power really lies. In the 4D perspective, you can start to understand the limitations of the mind, the limitations of knowledge, and the limitations of what you thought to be true. In the 3D perspective, there's a stronger belief in rationalism and science. There's a stronger belief in there is a way to know things. There's a way to know the correct answer. There's a step or process. But from the 4D's perspective, you can start to see that can kind of even break down, that there are limitations that are placed on the 3D perspective. And so this greater perspective allows you to embody that perspective and lower perspectives. I would highly recommend checking out the work of Suzanne Cook on the 9 stages of ego development.